People who were in a coma, what the fuck did you get off of when you woke up? My great-grandfather had a stroke in the 90s. He was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when he woke up, he couldn't speak English. He could only speak Choctaw. He learned it when he was a kid because his family lived near a Choctaw reserve, and he played with a lot of the local kids. He spoke the language fluently at the time, but had forgotten it for the rest of his life, and by this time, he couldn't remember a single word. This went on for about 10 days, and then he woke up from a nightmare and suddenly could only speak English again without remembering a single word of Choctaw. He could also repeat verbatim every conversation that took place in the room while he was in a coma. Wow, brains are amazing things. If I'm not mistaken, there's a guy who started speaking Cantonese after his coma and ended up hooking up with a Chinese woman. I was in a coma for 4 days. When I woke up, everyone around me was discussing some kind of baby of mine. I had lost my long-term memory and didn't even remember that I was pregnant. My son was in the children's hospital in the neonatal intensive care unit. I gave birth to him by C-section at 29 weeks. It was all related to Crohn's disease, I found out after I woke up. I had a ruptured colon during my pregnancy. My husband said I was talking like a baby when I first woke up. When I woke up, I felt very tired, and for the next few days I was still a little anxious. I remembered one conversation my mother had with a nurse while I was in a layup, and after a couple of days, my long-term memory came back to me and I remembered everything up to and including my second surgery. My son wasn't born until my third surgery. Changed. Anyway, my sonny was what surprised me. Is your son okay? Yes, he weighed 1 kilogram, 474 grams, and now he's 18 years old and 195 centimeters tall. Thank you for asking. I was in a coma for 9 days. When I woke up, I was still on a ventilator. When I was disconnected, my body didn't remember how to breathe on its own. I literally had to learn how to do it all over again. It took me a few days. I had no natural sense of how long or deep to inhale, how long to hold the air, and how long to exhale. I had to direct all my concentration to my breathing. It was really scary. Changed. For all the people who were wondering how I slept. I didn't sleep for the first couple of days. If I dozed off, my oxygen sensor would start beeping and wake me up, and then the nurse would yell at me across the ICU to remember to breathe. I couldn't talk because I had tubes in my nose and throat, but I remember waking up one day very tired to that damn beeping. Anyway, I started concentrating on breathing again, but it really pissed me off. My nurse would run up and yell at me to breathe. I looked at her and yelled in my absent voice, "Yes! Breathing!" She must have read my lips and felt indignation because she just held up her hands and said, Okay, good job," and then walked away. Anyway, shared it because I had never had that opportunity before. My ability to breathe normally came back to me after a month or so. My health is all right now, so I wouldn't say it's affected me in any way permanently. Well, thank you. Now I'm watching my every breath. Don't forget to blink. Asshole, you ruined the next 30 minutes of my life. My mother was in an induced coma for 3 months. When she woke up, she thought the hospital was trying to kill her. She tried to get out of bed and fell to the floor because she couldn't walk. Mostly, she was frightened that her legs were out of shape. She had to relearn how to control every muscle. She couldn't speak properly at all and had lost the ability to write. After relearning, her handwriting was different. She said she hated how perfect her hands looked. Her nails and cuticles were perfect and clean from not being used in any way. I remember trying to brush her hair after she woke up. Almost all of it had fallen out. She almost died every day she was in a coma. She had sepsis after diverticulitis, after a botched surgery. Most of her hair has grown back and she has been able to walk, but she has brain damage, which makes her look very groggy. She's always getting dizzy, but it's been 5 years and her recovery can be called a miracle. A good friend of our family fell into a coma for 6 months. At the end, when he woke up, he was freaking out that his wife looked so old. In fact, he lost the last 15 years from his memory. He knew he had 2 children, but they were babies, and he didn't even know about his 3rd child. The memory never came back. He jumped from no cell phones to smartphones and laptops. Everything was new to him. Stuck in the early 90s, but actually being in the 2000s, he had a lot to learn. But finding out that you had forgotten your children's growing up moments was the hardest thing for him to do. This is the saddest story I've seen in this thread. Oh my God, that's creepy. He must have felt it was punishment for something terrible. My wife was in an induced coma for 2 weeks for medical reasons. When she woke up, she had false memories. They were all based on conversations that were going on in her room. For example, she thought they had flown to Washington, D.C. for treatment. While she was in a coma, my father was talking about how he had just returned from a work trip to Washington. Somehow, she overheard it while she was passed out, and her brain interpreted it to mean that she was the one who flew to D.C. Even after we explained to her the reality of where she was, it took days for her to come to terms with the reality. My husband had a brain tumor, so he was out for a while when he was first brought to the hospital. The nurses were Asian, so when he woke up, he apologized to people for making them come to Japan to see him.